this is an example of a content flywheel I use that incorporates my podcast, my social channels, which are Twitter and LinkedIn, my YouTube channel, and my newsletter. And here's how it works. So, step one is someone from my audience submits a question for me to answer on my podcast. In this scenario, that is you. Step two is I write up my answer before we record this episode and I publish it as a social post on LinkedIn and or Twitter. That leads to step three, which is I see feedback. I use what I said in the social post as well as the feedback I get on it to improve the way I answer when we record this podcast. I have already posted this is so meta right now, but I have already posted the flywheel that I'm talking to you about right now. I have already posted on social media. I have tested
I
it.
follow you and I didn't even know that.
I just posted it yesterday, I think. But so I tested the idea, but I also forced myself to convert it to communicate it in that way, which helps me sort of clarify the idea, right? So now we're recording this episode where I'm answering this question that I've already written up in a sort of social post. The next step in my flywheel, step four, is I will publish our recorded podcast as a podcast and I'll pull a highlight clip, which will literally be this segment that I'm talking about right now will go out as a highlight clip on YouTube. I'm then going to step five, take that YouTube clip and I'm going to put it in my newsletter, right? So someone in my newsletter is going to get a link to this video, which is talking through this content wheel and sort of content flywheel and how I did it. Step six, my audience who consumes that my answer in the podcast, the newsletter, social, and YouTube, the places that I put it, is then going to submit their own questions to be answered in a future episode of the podcast. Because they're going to go, oh, Alex came on. She had a good question. He gave her a good answer. I want to submit a question and go on. And so step seven, I choose the best of those questions, which then goes back to step one and starts the flywheel over again with a new question. So if you look at that from just purely a content perspective, right? And you go back to sort of Nathan's rules. So activities flow, the first rule of his flywheel rules, activities flow smoothly from one into the next. Absolutely. Question leads to answer, leads to social, leads to recording, leads to YouTube, leads to newsletter, leads to more questions, right? It's a smooth sort of circular motion. Each rotation is easier than the previous one. The more stuff I put out, the more questions that I get. Each rotation, it's easier. And then his third law, each rotation produces more than the previous one. In theory, the consumption of this content is growing because with each one, there's more content out there. There's more people discovering me. There's more value. So that is an example of sort of a very simple content flywheel that I use that is strategic as opposed to what a lot of people do, which is just I create content and then I post excerpts.